Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video it is something very exciting for me because I'll be talking about one of my favorite lenses, although also least used, well, one of my least used RF lenses that I own on my RF series of lenses, but it's still an amazing lens nonetheless, and I feel like I'm ready to talk about it after owning it for over 1.5 years now. It's been an amazing lens, long story short of course, and yeah, in this video I'm ready to share my experience based on how I shoot, in case some of you guys might find it, useful and might find it, as a good second opinion to consider. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Canon RF 51.2, before we get further into the video, I would also like to just tell you a little bit of, where I'm coming from, so that, some opinions might make sense from, what I'll be talking about this lens. So the reason why it's, one of my least used lenses, well, actually two reasons. One is I mainly use the 28-70mm f2 and also the 85 1.2. Those are great combos that I usually take to events, take to my portrait shoots, and pretty much most other shoots. Those two lenses already cover the focal range. But sometimes if I need that special 1.2, and of course this this lens actually has its own very special character to its glass design and everything. When I do need not only the 1.2 but also that special characteristics of the glass. Sorry about the noise outside. People are just shooting fireworks, by the way, because I don't know, it's a few weeks before New Year's, but a lot of people are just excited to shoot fireworks. So anyway, back to the lens. Because of the characteristics and also the f1.2, it makes it a very unique lens to, have that reason to bring it with me despite already have a 50 here. And just because it's a 50 but it's f2, it's still a lot of gap difference between f2 and f1.2, so it is still a very unique lens to use. But another reason, which is the second reason, which is also a very important reason, is 50mm is not really my focal range. That's, yeah, pretty much why I don't really use this lens that often. So for a lot of people, actually for 95% of the photographers I know, 50mm is something like a must-have. Like, it's not too wide, it's not too tight. I always have the impression that 50mm, personally, and it's just my opinion, that it's a really weird focal range, because for me, a not so wide and not so tight lens is a 24mm. And of course, to some of you who use the 50 as a standard lens, hearing this is weird, because to you guys, a 24 is a wide angle. To me, a 24 is not at all a wide angle. It's just a normal lens that what I see, So yeah, but I guess that's also perception on how you start photography and things like that. I trained myself with my first prime lens being the 24 equivalent, because yeah, that's how I got into the prime system. So yeah, there is that. Anyway, onto the lens. As usual, I'll be dividing this video into 3 different sections. So the first one will be about the ergonomics, the operational side of things, the build quality, things like that, and then leading into the image quality, and then into the conclusion. So let's first start with the actual build quality, the ergonomics, the usability. Well, this lens is actually quite chunky compared to the EF counterpart. So if you are familiar with the EF version, like I am, this is a much bigger version, and adding the hood on here just makes it, well, much bigger. And of course, to me personally, in the very beginning, it did play a huge part in determining on whether or not I bring the lens. Of course, earlier I said that it does play a big part in the way that I don't use 50mm as much, but even without the lens hood, it is already kind of like a chunky lens, especially coming from a perspective that I don't use this lens as often. So with the space that I have for the 51.2, I could easily fit other lenses in there, like my 15-35 f2.8, although it's a little bit longer, but it's not that much longer anyway. So, I could have saved the extra space for other lenses as well. So that was something that I had to get used to, moving on from the EF 1.2 50 to the 51.2 RF. So yeah, but the build quality is also a lot more plasticky than the EF version. That being said, it is more like satisfying with a feeling. Like the focus ring does feel a bit more satisfying, a bit smoother as well, although it is focused by wire. And of course there's this control ring, which has its own nice click to it. And of course the switches does actually feel a little bit nicer, less stiff than the 51.2 EF, but I also quite like that actually. And even though it's less stiff, it is still not easily knocked, like you can't easily knock these switches, which is nice because I like to actually put my lenses kind of like upwards. Some people like putting it like this, and I just kind of like putting it like this into the bag. So yeah, that really helps a lot. So whenever you pull out the camera and the lens comes out of the bag, it's not easy to actually switch these switches. So yeah, that's something I really like about. And I also really like about the focusing system in here. Although it's not the fastest RF focusing lenses and it's not meant for sport, but I have shot some events like some concerts and also some moving portraits with this lens, and it proved to actually track my model or track the subject quite fine. But where you might find a little bit annoying in the autofocusing system is the sound. In photography, it doesn't make any difference, and you won't really hear it, especially if you're shooting in concerts. If you're shooting outdoors, you barely hear it. But if you're shooting video using the internal mic of the camera, you will pick up on the focusing sound. It's not a cheap kind of focusing sound. You still hear that it's a little bit quiet, kind of like a wind sound, but it is there if you're using an internal mic to actually record the environment sound. So just be aware of that. And another downside on the actual focusing system, well, I'm not sure if it's the actual focusing system or if it's really the optical part, but if you're doing a lot of pulling focus, especially in video, you will see a lot of focus breathing. And yeah, that can be a downside for some people, but for me, it's not that bad that I would have it as like a full negative mark. It's maybe just like a half negative mark, things like that. And now onto a more positive note, which is the filter thread. This lens has the 77mm filter thread, and that is actually very useful because most lenses, especially full frame lenses out there, are 77mm filter thread size. So you are able to actually share many of your accessories with this lens as well, assuming it uses, 77mm filter thread. And otherwise, there are a lot of filters out there. There are a lot of accessories out there more common for 77mm filter thread than other filter thread sizes. So it's going to be more available and or cheaper as well. So yeah, there is that. Otherwise, yeah, there's not much complaint towards this lens. I really love the weather sealing. I really like the fact that it feels a bit more weather sealed than the EF version, because when I do take it out to shoot in the rain, in the heat environment, in a super humid environment, it doesn't fog up as much. Actually, it barely fogs up. Apart from, right now in winter when I'm switching between super cold outside of -3 degrees inside a shopping mall that has 30 degrees heater, it does naturally fog up, of course. But I'm talking about being in the weather, being in like a heavy rain, being in the heavy snowstorm, being in a really humid environment. It doesn't easily fog up from being in that kind of environment. So yeah. So on that perspective, I do feel like the actual weather sealing is a bit better than the EF version, but don't quote me on that because I am not an engineer and I haven't really fully tested it yet. It's just based on my experience. But yeah, otherwise I really like it. And the last negative point I would give to this lens is, as you can see, I do have a skin on here, but the reason I have a skin on here is not because it looks cool, but well, that too, it actually looks cool, but the actual plastic build quality here, the type of plastic they use, it gets scratched very easily, but it's a type of scratch where you can actually rub it off and it will go away, but it still looks annoying. Sometimes, I'm just gonna grip the camera and sometimes the nail would actually scratch onto the side and it would leave that kind of like white scratch, but it's also kind of a white scratch that you can just rub it off once and then it's just gone, but it's still very annoying. And I heard it from other photographers as well, is that the plastic finishing here is not really the best. I know that Canon is going for that really nice subtle matte look, but on my case it just got really annoying that I just had to put stickers, well, the skin on here, and also the same with pretty much all of my RF lenses. For example, the 28-70 also has its own skin, so yeah, there is that. Yeah, and now onto the image quality. The image quality on this lens is actually quite nice. Regarding the chromatic aberration, I was really impressed because the 51.2 was already really amazing considering that it is a 1.2 lens, but with this you barely see it. And of course nowadays the camera has its own, you know, chromatic aberration correction, things like that, but assuming you turn that off, you would still barely see it unless if you really zoom in and just pixel peep. Otherwise, it's not as visible as previous lenses, so I'm really impressed by how well it manages to control the f1.2, and it actually just makes this lens a lot more usable at f1.2 than the previous EF 51.2 lens. So yeah, I'm really impressed about that. And then also moving on to the next point, the contrast control is really nice. So yes, at f1.2 it's not as contrasty as the f2, well, with this lens at f2, but it's still very good compared to most prime lenses out there anyway, and especially at this price point it should be good, but it just makes it, you know, justifiable paying the price tag for this lens because of how good the contrast and the chromatic aberration control is. And of course the vignetting and the barrel distortion as well on this lens is also very nicely controlled. Of course, you will still see a little bit of it. If you turn the corrections off in camera, you will still see a little bit of it, but that's very minor. And to be honest, as a portrait shooter, I love the bit of vignetting and also the barrel distortion, because it does kind of emphasize the face a little bit more as well. And yeah, I really love it a lot. And when you shoot with this lens against the sunlight or against any strong light source, there is very little ghosting with this lens. And at night, sure, you will see the ghosting a little bit more, but in the same time, if you stop it down to like f1.4, f1.6, or even f1.8, it just improves it so much better, just so much better. But already at f1.2, it is still very good for an f1.2 lens. The sharpness on this lens is great, and even though I shoot portrait, and sharpness sometimes can be like a double-edged sword, because if it's too sharp, then it's not pleasing, because otherwise it's just emphasizing all of the facial flaws of models, even with the best skin out there. So this lens, the way it renders the skin, the way it renders the object is actually quite nice. Still retains a lot of detail, but not in an intrusive way, if that makes sense. But that is also just a very subjective thing to actually judge, so just take that as a grain of salt. So yeah, the image quality on this lens is really nice, it's really sharp, the contrast control is great. Of course, if you want the best contrast control and also the sharpness control, I would suggest using it at around f2, that's the best. Which brings me to this lens again at f2. It's already such a great lens and it's very versatile, but you know, the characteristics of the glass and how it renders the skin and how it renders pretty much all the other details, yet still maintaining a lot of detail. I don't know, it's just a little bit of magical characteristics to it, so to speak. It's not too clinical like some of the Sigma lenses where all it cares about is sharpness, that it looks too clinical. This is still very sharp, but in a way that it still retains certain characteristics to it, which is something that I really love. So yeah, there's that. Oh, and also the sun star effect. I don't really shoot a lot with this lens when it comes to sun star effect, but when I do get the sun star effect, it does look very pleasing, just like pretty much most of the other RF lenses out there. So if you're into that kind of thing, which I am, just not with this lens, more with the 28-70 lens and the 85 1.2, so on and so forth. But with this lens, I'm not really into the sun starburst effect. But when you do shoot into the sun and like to have that sun star effect, or into any bright light source, then this lens will render those sun star effects really, really beautifully, and you will love it. So yeah, there is that. Otherwise, the color on this lens is also quite nice. I really love the color reproduction. And yeah, now into the conclusion. It's overall a very easy lens to talk about and also recommend. Yes, for the price point, if you just look at it, that it's only a 51.2, about 33% brighter than 1.4, I believe. It's not a huge jump, but in the same time, if you look at the image quality, and if you do also like either enjoy the image quality out of it and or make money from it, it is a great lens that already justifies the cost of the lens. So yeah, the image quality is great. There's barely any flaw. Yes, of course, if you want to pixel peep, there are still flaws like certain chromatic aberration, but it's very minor, like super, super minor for a 1.2. And it's still very, very sharp for a 1.2 when shooting at f1.2. And yeah, the only downside for me is again the size and of course the plastic build quality. But otherwise, the weight, I really love the weight that it actually counterweights with the camera perfectly. This is the R5, by the way. I stopped using the battery grip because I like to keep things small, and when carrying like at least four cameras in the camera bag, having the battery grip out is actually a great way to save space. But anyway, back to the conclusion. So yeah, overall for me, it's a great lens that actually justifies the cost of it. It's a little bit too big, not in some cases, in most cases, for a 50mm. Of course, if you're looking at the Nikon Z system, my friend's 50mm on the Nikon side is like, you know, so much bigger than this one, so I cannot complain as much. But in the same time, this is also a great lens. So if you're into 50mm and if you can justify your price point for this lens, then I would highly recommend it. But of course, if you're not too much into 50mm, I would say something like a 28-70 is still a great option to go for, or even the RF 51.8 is a great option to go for. The only reason I don't want to go for the RF 51.8 is there's no weather sealing and it's only f1.8. Of course, that's f2, but it covers a lot of focal range. So yeah. So yeah, overall this video has been kind of a weird video to actually talk about, simply because it's actually a really good lens if you can justify the price, because for me the image quality alone just outweighs the price, the downside of the size, the downside of the plastic finishing, things like that. But of course, to many people the 1.8 will already be more than good enough. And of course, even though I'm not a 50mm person, but when I do need a 50mm, this lens just doesn't let me down. So it's really a great lens that is still really reliable, and I will just leave it there because I think my opinion on this lens is really clear. Yeah, but otherwise, if you need a free photography guidebook, it's absolutely for free on my website. Just click the link down in the description section below. If you have any questions, any suggestions, any recommendation, feel free to also just comment down in the comment section below. My photography courses are also out. Some free ones are definitely coming up by early 2024, so keep an eye out on that as well. And also I have other courses planned to actually be launched by next year, early next year as well. So definitely more genre of photography will be uploaded onto the online courses. So yeah, otherwise I thank you all very much for watching. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Till next time, bye for now.